Hey guys, today I am working on my novel a little bit. It is December 3rd, so this is going to be a compilation writing vlog, hopefully of a bunch of clips put together, and we'll see how it turns out by the end of the month. Currently clocking in around 20,000 words, which is a little bit further than what I had before. I didn't do NaNoWriMo. It's too stressful, so I just avoid it. But here we are in December. We're going to work on some stuff. And I've mentioned this before, but what I like to do before I start is go back to what I'd last written and go from there. So I'll tell you how it all works out. You know, I think one of the hardest parts about writing this story is that I'm a pantser, so I went into it with no outline. I mean, I have an outline, but it's very loose, and I didn't really know what I wanted to have happen. And so things keep changing and changing and changing on the fly, which means that as I'm writing certain sections and certain paragraphs, I am writing things that directly contradict what I wrote before. So in revision, I'm gonna have to go back and do a lot of work because I almost feel like I'm writing Marvel comics. You know, I've written a whole canon and then I come up with a better idea that completely contradicts the old canon. So I keep going with the new idea, but based on ideas that are new canon, but I haven't actually gone back and rewritten into the canon yet. So, for example, the Queen, I have a scene where the one character shows a picture and I describe how she looks. But then later on, I decided that she has a scar on her eye for plot reasons that I'll get into at some point. And now all of her descriptions going forward, she's going to have that scar in her eye and it'll refer to this backstory that isn't actually mentioned. So I have to go back and fix that in second drafts and revisions, but I'm going forward as if I've already put that into the story. So plot holes are going to be something I really have to watch out for, but it's making it difficult sometimes because I start writing, then I have to remember, am I writing this new section on the old canon, or have I already switched into the new canon section? So we will see how it goes. So, success for today's writing session. I got close to 1,000 words in, and I figured out where I wanted to go next with the story. I was not having a mental block so much as I hadn't sat down and really worked out what I wanted to do. I wanted to have two characters meet earlier than they needed to, and it would have not been in an interesting enough way. I needed to introduce a little bit more conflict. So once I hit upon that idea using one of the characters that I more recently came up with, I realized that it's going to work a lot better with this new way. So we're going to put off the meeting for a while, and that's going to be more interesting because it just felt too easy before. And I know it's supposed to be a fun little romance story, but it's also an adventure story. So when you're writing a story, you need to make sure that you have conflicts and things that feel earned. And it just didn't feel that it was the right moment. So I've kind of drawn out this moment a little bit. And it's still been kind of fun of games, but this is really now the refusal of the call for the hero. They've been presented with a choice and they've decided, you know what, this is a little bit too much. I'm in over my head and I want to go home. So that's where we are at right now. We'll see how it progresses, but I'm happy with what I've got for today. Hello everybody. I'm back again for a writing vlog. Today is December 6th, or as I like to say, Christmas 6th, and that is why I'm wearing this Santa hat. It's also very cold in the room that I'm in. That's why I have a blanket on. I want to be comfy when I'm writing, and I want to make sure that I'm not freezing the whole time. That's why I have a blanket. But as always, I'm going to start with rereading what I just wrote from last time, going over that, and then going forward once I have my ideas. All right, so I kind of hit a little bit of a, not a standstill, but my character is sneaking away from the palace, and I needed to have a good idea of what the palace looked like. Fortunately, I've been watching a ton of Shadiversity videos lately, and so I had a good idea of how to design a palace. I basically made the palace a mini castle because I think that looks really, really cool. Now, it's not super, super fortified because the palace itself is within the city walls, which itself is a whole castle. Okay, so we've got the like greater outer lying area of the city. There's a wall around the whole city, and that functions as the outer part of the castle. And then inside we've got a castle within a castle. I actually made a little sketch here. I don't know if you can see that really well. I just drew this on the back of an old piece of paper here that I had laying around, but it's a castle sketch. You can see here's the outer wall, here's the inner wall, and the palace itself. And so that way I can visualize what's going on, because the palace is a very important building that we will be returning to over and over in the story. Okay, well, that concludes today's writing session. I got about 1,000 words in, which is pretty good. I had a lot of fun writing this part. This story, it's been fighting me, and I love the challenge. I love kind of like wrestling with it and figuring out how to figure out where I want to go next. And this part, it felt really good, really natural, and we're finally meeting one of the characters that wasn't originally in the story, but then I decided to throw in. He is the romantic rival. And already in my head, I can just see them having so much banter and fun. So I'm really looking forward to writing that. He has just entered the scene in the very, very last line of what I wrote. So I'm super excited to get to him and really start fleshing out how my character is responding to someone who acts the way he does. So that's going to be really, really fun. And I have to leave it there for now, but really happy with today's writing session, and I'm looking forward to seeing what I can get done next time. Hey everybody, it is me, ETJ Writes, back again to do some more writing. Today is December 10th, and I'm excited to kind of dive into where I had left off last time and then keep going. So I've been thinking about what kind of interactions I want the two characters, the prince and the princess, have in the next section that I'm going to be working on here. So I've been really kind of thinking about that over the last few days, working it out in my head, and I'm really excited to just jump into the page and get stuff written. As I always do, I'm going to go back and read over what I have, and then I'm going to start writing, and then I'll check in with you guys a little bit later. So I just wanted to take a minute and talk about some of the things that I do when I reread, because I've just finished my reread actually. I like to go through and edit things. I know there's a lot of writing advice out there that says don't edit as you go. And for me, that doesn't work. I need to have a good clean manuscript, or else my eyes get distracted by a lot of errors that pop up. And there's a couple things I can do to help myself combat those errors. One is, if I'm using fantasy words and things like that, clicking accept or add to dictionary with my spell check. So that's something that I do. That way I don't have red squiggly lines everywhere. And the second thing that I do is put brackets around things. Sometimes it's just around a word that I know it's a repeated word. I'm going to come back and fix it in revisions. Or sometimes it's a whole sentence, a chunk that isn't working, and I'm not quite sure why it's not working at that particular point in time, but I'm going to come back and look at it later. And sometimes as I'm doing my reread, and I'm going over all these things, I'm actually able to then correct these things as I go along. Say, oh, obviously that's supposed to be there. And then as I come to do revisions, I'm working with a cleaner and cleaner manuscript each time. And that's just how I personally like to write. I don't do well coming back to a first draft that is riddled with errors. It has to be somewhat clean for me. So I go through and I do that. But one of the other things I also do is just kind of clean up story structure as I go along. So I'm looking at it at the sentence level, but I'm also thinking, okay, how does this fit into the rest of the story so far? And sometimes even deleting one sentence will change how the flow of the story goes. So as then I continue to write, I'm building upon what I've just revised, but not revised in a big way. I'm just kind of skimming through, and when things catch my attention, I fix them. I'm not going back and nitpicking every little thing, because again, that's for later revisions, but I do go and make small changes that translate into bigger changes down the road. And again, people say that you shouldn't do this because you're wasting your time getting everything really right. One of the reasons I think people say that is because then people spend all this time working on something and it turns out really well, and then they don't want to get rid of it in revisions. But all writing is practice, so even if you spend your time refining a section that's beautiful and then you end up not using it in your final draft, you taught yourself how to write a really beautiful section, which can then be applied to different areas of your final manuscript. So some different reasons why I like to go over and reread and then also edit as I go. Alrighty, so I have gotten to the end of today's writing session. I am really pleased by what I've got so far. As I thought, I'm having a lot of fun writing this character. He, and I'll read you a little snippet in just a moment, but he just has this great confidence about him that I'm really, 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 really enjoying. And it's funny because he's a character that I didn't plan at all. I just came up with him in July, and it's really interesting because when I first came up with him, I don't even remember exactly how the idea came to me, but I remember writing it down, and I found the post where I said, I came up with a new character. I needed a romantic rival, but I won't have any love triangles, I promise, and have since fallen in love with the poor guy. His backstory is, kneels down and touches the dirt. Something terrible happened here. He also happens to be the missing piece of my story. I'm so excited to write it now. So I wrote that post, and then I later on I made something on Twitter about it and then added that to Instagram, so I will stick that right here. But the interesting thing is that, yeah, the more I think about this character, the more he pulls everything together, and the story would be really boring and missing conflict if he wasn't there, because he fills so many functions. He's not the primary antagonist, but is very much related to the primary antagonist in a number of different ways, and it's going to be really exciting to see how that all shakes out. And I'm just having fun writing him. At heart, he's not a bad character, but right now he's being very naughty, so I am excited to see where that goes, especially as he interacts with the main character. And I'll read you a little bit of where I'm at right now. Every queendom needs a queen, the man replied, taking a step closer and extending his hand. All I need is your assent. Candy stared at him. This handsome stranger, this prince, if she was understanding his implications correctly. His long grey-black hair was pulled into a slightly messy ponytail, and the tabard he wore boasted a beautifully embroidered tapestry of intertwining flowers and stars. His dark, serious eyes seemed to stare directly into hers, and she felt a strange desire to say yes. After all, if she were in an extremely vivid hallucination, what was the harm? So that's where we're at. And spoilers, this prince that she's run across, he's not going to be able to do anything to her right now, but he definitely has some interesting plans that if he can't achieve them through one means, he will try another way. So I'm looking forward to writing that. We are at a very climactic moment of this chapter, and we'll see how it goes from there. I also got about 500, nearly 600 words in today, so that's pretty exciting. Sometimes I get more, sometimes I get less, but I feel like things really moved in this section, so that's exciting. This story, I think it's going to be shorter than my previous two stories, which the first novel clocks in at about over 100,000, and the second novel clocks in at around 150,000. And this novel, I feel, is going to be much closer to under 100,000. Things are moving much more quickly, and events are just flying through. So we'll see what the final word count turns out being, but definitely one thing leads to the other much more quickly and I'm kind of tackling world building from a slightly different perspective as well. So experimenting with anything new is always fun, and looking forward to seeing how it goes, how it all turns out. Welcome back to ETJ Writes. This is December 12th today, and it is time for another writing vlog. As always, I'm going to go back and read over what I wrote before. Should be a little bit quicker because I didn't get to write quite as much, but what I wrote I feel really moves the story along. So we'll see what happens from there. Something else that I haven't really mentioned about this story is that in between some of the chapters I'm having little interludes, and I did get the idea from listening to Jeff Wheeler's books, more specifically his King Fountain series, but also some of his Muirwood series, where he has people taking notes in journals and things like that. They also do this in Redwall, but it tends to be more the epilogues instead of in between the chapters. It gives us insight into what is happening from other characters' perspectives in a way that the main character can't know, but that is still vital to the story. So my interludes, they are from the perspective of the primary antagonist, who we don't get to meet until a little bit later in the story, but by including these interludes, we the reader get to meet her in the narrative, even if we don't get to meet her in the interactions between her and the main character. And originally I was going to do them more as diary entries, but with one of the characters that I've introduced, I hit upon the idea of it being letter writing between these two characters and a whole plot that is being carried out behind the scenes. So that's going to be a lot of foreshadowing I'm putting in, and I'm definitely going to have to go back and rewrite these once the story is finished, move them around to where they make the most sense and have the most impact. Okay, well, I got finished my writing session for today. I'm pretty excited about how it turned out. I know I say that every time, but it's fun working on this story, and although it really fought me at the beginning, the more I actually sit down and work on it, the easier getting the words to flow has been. So with this next section, I actually just decided to go ahead and end the chapter, and I think that came out pretty well. I'll just redo the last line here. The prince worked his jaw back and forth for a few moments before giving a tight nod and raising his left hand. He turned to Candy. We'll meet again, princess. Then he walked backwards until the shadows swallowed him. So that's where I'm at. I feel like that's a pretty good line to end this chapter on. Of course, who knows whether that will change as I go along. As I've done other writing before, I've noticed that sometimes I go back and add to the ends of chapters, and sometimes I go back and I take away. It's all about drawing the reader into what's going to happen next. I made it to about 600 words, which, again, it's not as much as I've done before, but I feel like those other sessions really helped me pad out the middle of the chapter and get to where I needed for the ending of it. So about 600 words, and overall the chapter's clocking in about 4,500 words, which I'm trying not to go over 5K for my chapters, because I've had other chapters before that were really long, and although I love long chapters, I know that it's not the easiest thing for readers, so I'm trying to keep them on the shorter side so that whoever picks up the book and reads it's not going to be overwhelmed by a chapter that just keeps going and going and going and going. The story itself is clocking in around 23,000 words, which is, if I'm aiming to have 80,000 words, just over a quarter of a way through. Not that I really pay that much attention to the, what you have to have, the 15%, 20%, 50% steps that some people say you need to have exactly happen at each percentage point. It is kind of nice to know that, okay, I've written a quarter of it through and I'm hitting a lot of my marks. I've had the world introduced, I've had the conflicts introduced, pretty much the main stakes introduced. And this is about the part in the story where we get to the second inciting incident. Like, there's been one inciting incident already, so you can kind of go back and forth with where you put inciting incidents, but this is definitely a fairly important one that's going to get Candy pulled into a whirlwind of things that happen next. Now I'm going to be writing chapter 5, and I am really looking forward to that. Chapter 4 needed to exist in the middle to introduce some really important ideas and introduce my prince, who is going to be one of the antagonists, and he is going to be a very prominent antagonist until we meet the real behind the scenes villains. So I'm looking forward to that. But this is already getting fairly long, so I'm actually going to stop this writing vlog right here, and this will be part 1 of my December writing vlog. And as we get to the middle of the month here, I'm just going to start a part 2, and that should carry us through the rest of the month without making this into an extremely long video. So check the description box down below for a link to part 2. And until next time, happy writing. ETJ out.